Hi, I'm Dr. Dominique Royam, a music director and conductor. I'm here today to talk to you about art and technology, more specifically, music and technology. Now, technology has been influencing art since we've had art. Every new step in our technological progress means a different way for artists to interpret what they see in the world and help us interpret what they see. Today, we're going to start with analog trends through musique concrète. Then we're going to talk about sampling and the digital revolution. And we're going to finish with Google's Magenta project, which is Google teaching an AI to create music. Before we delve into these topics, we have to do something difficult. We have to define art. Human evolution has made us into pattern recognition machines. We derive pleasure from looking at patterns, looking for breaks in patterns, and finding patterns where there might not be patterns. When we make art, we arrange things into a pattern, whether it be pieces of paper, paint colors, or noises. It's this arrangement that ascribes meaning to the art. So that means art is the act of ascribing meaning. The viewer or the spectator has a special role in art. Half a century ago, Marcel Duchamp said,
"The creative act is not performed by the artist alone. The spectator brings the work in contact with the external world by deciphering and interpreting its inner qualification, and thus adds his contribution to the creative act."
This definition of art does not hinge on quality. There is good art and there is bad art, but bad art is still art. Now let's talk about the dawn of electronic music, musique concrète. It hinges on acousmatic listening, which is a sound that is divorced from the item that makes the sound.
Bar.
The first artist to create a work of musique concrète was el-dabh. He borrowed a recorder from Middle East radio and wandered the streets of Cairo, recording what he heard. That included parts of the Zar ceremony. He then reprocessed it using echo voltage controls reverberation and re-recorded the work that you are listening to right now. His work wasn't well known outside of Cairo, and it took until the late 1950s for his work to be recognized among the wider world. The person who is usually credited as the father of musique concrète is Pierre Schaeffer at the Club d'Essai de la Radiodiffusion Télévision Française. He formally began his investigation into noises in 1948, 4 years after Halim el-Dabh's expression of Zar. When asked about the creation of musique concrète, Schaeffer stated, "When I proposed the term musique concrète, I intended to point out an opposition with the way musical work usually goes. Instead of notating musical ideas on paper with the symbols of solfege and entrusting their realization to well-known instruments, the question was to collect concrete sounds, wherever they came from, and to abstract the musical values they were potentially containing." Musique concrète took a lot of expensive technology to produce. A lot of it was created by cutting and splicing tape, re-recording it and splicing it again to create new and interesting sounds. One of the most well-known works to use this method came out of the BBC Radiophonics workshop in 1963. Created before analog synths, this piece had to be created on 3 different wheels of tape that had been stitched together by hand. Recording the work required 3 tape players to be started at the exact right time and recorded by a 4th. This work is the Doctor Who theme song. Around the same time, other techniques were being used to manipulate found sound and noise. In 1961, halfway across the world, LaFar Stewart began experimenting with what he called computer music, or creating sounds with pulse width modulation. This was based completely in software, not in hardware, and can be understood as a type of bit banging. One of the first commercial uses of this was in 2 arcade games with music composed and programmed by Tomohiro Nishikado. Due to CPU restrictions, these games had very little music, usually just for opening screens and for sound effects. Since they were in an arcade, the programmers could rely on the fact that there would be plenty of ambient noise to fill in the gaps. The technology had a very limited range, so Nishikado created what he could from the tools he had on hand. These iconic snippets were actually used in a pop song by a Japanese synth band called the Yellow Magic Orchestra. You can hear a sample of both Gunfight and Space Invaders in the band's song Computer Game Theme from Circus. As technology improved, music got more complicated. Also, the relationship between video game composers and pop music stars also became more complex. YMO's hit Raideen was actually sampled in Sega's game Super Locomotive. This was an early example of sampling, or taking a portion or sample of one sound recording and reusing it as an instrument or a sound recording in a different song or piece. Recognized as a technique of musique concrète, artists could sample using analog or digital methods. As home computers became more prevalent and more affordable, sampling became easier. More and more artists could sample effectively, bypassing the studio system and creating music for themselves and their friends. Sampling is just modern-day version of pastiche. A pastiche is a work of visual art, literature, theater, or music that imitates the style or character of the work of one or more artists. Unlike parody, pastiche celebrates rather than mocks the work it imitates. It's from the Italian pastico or pate. This technique is used in many older works to help define a time and place or a specific culture that's being discussed. One example is in the opera Madame Butterfly, about American servicemen in Japan. It was written by Puccini, an Italian opera composer, but he quotes the Star-Spangled Banner to remind the audience of the specific cultural milieu of the officers outside of their immediate surroundings. As I mentioned, the electronic revolution allowed many more people to create art without the traditional barriers to entry. Sampling became very popular in hip-hop and pop music. We can trace the concept of sampling by following one specific sound clip, the Amen break. Recorded as a part of the track Amen Brother in 1969 by the funk band The Winstons, the 6-second clip languished on the B-side of their record for the single Color Him Father. The specific date of its reemergence is unknown, but it probably was around the time of the New York City blackout of 1977. Due to looting, that historic blackout seeded the growth of hip-hop by distributing expensive audio equipment around the city. The city DJs would comb unused records and back catalogs for sections of music they could mix together during underground parties. One of the first professionally recorded instances of the Amen break sample was in the track I Desire from Salt-N-Pepa's debut album Hot, Cool, and Vicious in 1986. The Amen break became very popular at that point and is still being used today. According to the website whosampled.com, the Amen break is sampled in 2,831 songs currently. Here's a selection of the most famous.
Straight out of Compton, crazy motherfucker named Ice Cube.
The drummer for the Winstons, G.C. Coleman, was never paid for the extensive sampling of his work. He died a pauper. There are many reasons why we still use pastiche or sampling. We quote people, we pay homage, we use it to critique or to give information about a time or place, to help the listener experience a different side of an everyday object or sound. And we manipulate things that you know are divorced from their context, just like in musique concrète. The entire reason people sample is because music carries cultural meaning. That brings us to today and the cutting edge of music and technology, AI. Google's Magenta project, in their own words, is a research project exploring the role of machine learning in the process of creating art and music. This primarily involves developing new deep learning and reinforcement learning algorithms for the generating songs, images, drawings, and other materials. But it's also an exploration in building smart tools and interfaces that allow artists and musicians to extend, not replace, their processes using these models. You can interact with some of the individual sections on their webpage. Magenta is an experiment in deep and recurrent neural networks, training AIs to recognize, analyze, and create music, just like we learn music. One of the biggest critiques of a project like this is the idea that computers might replace artists. However, just like any technological leap, it just becomes a new way of creating art. Another experiment from Sony CSL Research Lab uses this collaborative model to create songs. The researchers have developed flow machines, as they say, a system that learns music styles from a huge database of songs. They released a tune on YouTube called Daddy's Car. The program composed in the style of the Beatles, but a French composer, Benoit Carré, arranged it, produced it, and wrote the lyrics. The Beatles as a style for the song was a good one. It has that iconic rock sound, but with a flavor of experimentalism, which the Beatles were known for. We understand the song because we recognize the inspiration. It has been communicated to us through the use of a known idiom. We're teaching AI to create art by taking it through the same process we use to create art. We synthesize the culture around us, choose to combine things, and create with the tools we have on hand. This selection allows us, the viewer, to find meaning in the selection, thus creating art. Creating art has always been an act of problem solving. Every artist must create the most meaningful experience they can out of the methods and resources at hand. Engineers do the same thing. They create the most meaningful thing they can with the tools that are in front of them. New technologies might revolutionize the ways we create, but what those technologies create is indisputably art. Citations and further readings on these subjects can be found on my website, dominiqueroyam.com. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks so much.